Time for another ULEZ update, I think, and it turns out that the Scrappage scheme has not been as successful as perhaps people thought. It also now appears that some of the cars from the Scrappage scheme will be heading to Ukraine, and the other thing is that Londoners are even less happy with ULEZ now than they were before its introduction. I'll tell you everything right after this.
A brown car guy. Brown car guy.
Right then, so let's start with the first story, which is about the Scrappage scheme. Has it really helped people the way it was intended to, or the way that the mayor and the mayor's office keep claiming that it does? Well, there's a story in the Standard. Actually, the stories come out several places, but I'm looking at it in the Standard right now. And it says the ULEZ Scrappage scheme has not paid out to almost 6 in 10 applicants. Wowzers, 60%. TfL admits that 68,630 applications to the £210 million fund, that was the amount allocated for the Scrappage scheme, has yet to be approved or they've been rejected. However, £158 million have been handed out. Now, the thing there is that 158 million have been handed out. There were 210 million allocated. So therefore, there's 52 million pounds left, and 60% of applicants have either been rejected or have not gone through. If they were all to be approved, you've got 52 million between 68,630 applicants. They only get 757 pounds each. Right. I mean, that's not the reality of it, but I'm just working out, for example, in that scenario. So up to 60% of motorists, like I said, have applied for the Scrappage scheme to avoid having to pay the ULEZ scheme, of course. So just to reiterate what the Scrappage scheme is all about, it was introduced to help motorists with older cars that were not ULEZ compliant, so that if the cars, if they wanted, they could scrap the car, and they would get £2,000 for a car anyway, and they could then buy a car that was ULEZ compliant. So Transport for London has said that it committed a total of £158 million, of £158.1 million of the Mayor's Scrappage Fund to 46,616 applicants, but admitted that 68,630 have either been rejected or were still waiting to be approved. There's only, like I said, about £50 million left in the fund, and this could mean that thousands of drivers, charities and small businesses will not receive a penny, despite what they said that they would be helping people to upgrade their cars. Remember that whilst they're waiting for this to go through, and if they've still got their vehicle, which one has to assume they do because they've applied for the Scrappage scheme, that means every time they're driving it, they're paying the £12.50 ULEZ charge, the daily ULEZ charge, just to do it. And if they don't, there's a £180 fine. So the fund, of course, did grow, because initially it was 110 million. Then it grew to 160 million ahead of the ULEZ expansion in August. But then they added another 50 million from the 2024-2025 City Hall budget, and they actually took it to 210 million. So, wow, that was a lot of money that went into ULEZ, right? TfL data shows that by January the 14th, 31,577 of 64,923 applications from car drivers or motorcyclists had been approved. So, as had 15,000, so about half of car applications, as had 15,039 of the 50,323 applications to the van and minibus fund. So that's affecting businesses. Keith Prince, a City Hall Conservative, said the latest figures suggest that most applications are rejected, and that's very concerning. These numbers represent the lives and the livelihoods of thousands of people who are not only out of pocket, but are also without a ULEZ compliant vehicle. So, like I said, assuming that they're still using their existing vehicle. Just to reiterate, motorcyclists also could get up to £1,000 for their scrapped bike. Car drivers, as I said, was £2,000, but for minibus and van owners, it could be between £6,000 and £11,500, depending on what vehicle they were getting, what their requirements were, etc. TfL was unable to actually explain how many of the applications had been rejected. How does it not know that? How does it not have that data? It said that the total number of applications included some drivers that had made multiple applications. There's something interesting about that. I'll come back to that later on, actually, because it sounds like the people were trying to, well, they're making it sound like people were trying to fraud the system. But I think there might be another reason for that. Because they go on to say, it said that it had to follow due diligence in checking the validity of applications as public funds were at stake, but tried to help applicants who had failed to supply all the necessary documentation. I'll go a bit more into that a little later on. Scrappage funds were initially available to low-income or disabled Londoners, but the eligibility criteria was ditched last August to enable all Londoners with non-compliant vehicles to apply. Well, I mean, that was great for for grabbing headlines, right? It was great to go, oh, we've opened it up to everybody. Well, you have, but then you didn't approve anybody's application. So, yeah, it's nice to get these sound bites in the headlines, but not actually to follow through, isn't it? The data shows that of 30,186 applications from sole traders, 7,409 have been approved. 7,409 have been approved, which means that 22,777 have not been approved. So that's nearly 23,000 businesses that are struggling right now because their applications have not been approved. Businesses and sole traders. Gets even worse because 593 charities applied as well. And they really need their vehicles, right? Only 175 of those have been approved, which means that 418 have not been approved. So these charity vehicles have not been, their applications have not been approved. If they're still using their vehicles, they're incurring a cost of £12.50 a day. That's charity. Wow. Hillingdon residents and businesses have received the most scrappage money, almost £15 million to date, after 4,339 of them applied. 4,339 of more than 10,000 applications were approved in those areas, and they got 15 million to date. The second place was Croydon at 12.2 million. Then it was Bromley at 10.1 million and Sutton at 10 million. The area that's received the least amount of money, I suppose unsurprisingly, has been Kensington and Chelsea. They received 351,000 for 100 approved applications. I mean, to be honest, if you're living in that area, that's already central London. So why did they have non-ULEZ compliant vehicles that then they applied for the scrappage scheme? They were already in the previous scrappage, in the ULEZ area. So that's bizarre. But anyway, Seb Dance, the Deputy Mayor for Transport, said there had been a huge take-up for the ULEZ scrappage scheme. The biggest of its kind in the UK. And we want even more businesses, charities, and individuals to be able to replace or retrofit their older polluting vehicles. But you're running out of money. TfL's Director of Strategy and Policy said applications are being processed in a matter of days, and I would urge anyone who owns a non-compliant vehicle to apply to the scheme. Updated figures on the number of drivers paying the ULEZ are due next month, so we'll find out what's going on then. By last September, a month after the zone's expansion across all of the 33 boroughs of London, more than 95% of vehicles met the emission rules. This is what they keep saying. I find that very, very hard to believe. I looked into that a little bit more, aside from this story, and what I found was that in the first month following the ULEZ expansion, it was observed that 92% of vehicles driving into the zone were compliant. 92%. I mean, that's much higher than I thought, but it makes sense because obviously once the ULEZ thing was introduced, people stopped driving their vehicles. That didn't mean they didn't have the vehicles. That didn't mean they don't still have the vehicles. It just meant that they stopped driving them into that area, which of course makes sense because otherwise they get charged, or they will reduce the amount that they will drive. Data indicates that approximately 95% of vehicles driving in London on an average day are compliant with the ULEZ emissions. Specifically in outer London, the compliance rate is around 96.4%, with about 52,000 vehicles detected daily that do not meet the standards. I mean, there's the operative phrase there, detected daily. And I think that's the problem, is they're assuming that that's the number of vehicles. The headline is that 95% of vehicles are compliant. But actually, they're not. That's 95% of vehicles that you have detected on the road at a certain time are compliant. But it doesn't account for the fact that a lot of people still... I mean, I walking around here in Northwest London, I can see compliant and non-compliant vehicles. I can see them. So that doesn't mean you haven't accounted for the people that have still got their vehicles but are not using them. So it's not really a correct figure. What did the Lib Dems say? Lib Dem mayoral candidate, this is from the Evening Standard story, said Rob Blackie said the motorists who had scrapped a vehicle prior to the rules being widened should be able to apply. So this is the other thing that happened, is that people, before the scheme was extended to cover everybody, a lot of people had already changed their vehicles. Not necessarily scrapped them, but certainly had changed them. And that was unfortunate, because then they lost out because they hadn't had the opportunity to scrap their vehicle and get the $2,000 for it. These figures prove that Sadiq Khan rushed the ULEZ expansion and has left thousands of Londoners without the support they need. That's Rob Blackie, continuing his quote. Far too many small businesses and sole traders are struggling to get access to scrappage money, a double punishment, as they are hit with a charge each day while they try to do the right thing and change to a cleaner vehicle. As I said, if they've still got it and they're still waiting for their application to be approved, they're still paying their daily charge. So I went through that. I went through the scrappage scheme. Now, a while back, I did do a video about the Ukraine issue. Now, the Ukraine issue, what's happened is obviously they've run out of vehicles in Ukraine because of the war that's happening there. And here we have, what I have said and what other people have said are perfectly usable and serviceable vehicles that are being unnecessarily scrapped because of the arbitrary imposition of ULEZ. I mean, we're talking vehicles, as young as 2015 in some cases, especially in the case of diesel SUVs. And they're being scrapped. Those are perfectly good vehicles. They're not necessarily being scrapped. They're probably being sold. But you see what I'm getting at. So looking at the fact that there are all these useful vehicles or usable vehicles that are being scrapped, the point is that, well, shouldn't we do something useful with them and pass them on to Ukraine, which has actually asked for these vehicles because they are running out of vehicles there. And I did have some, some comments on that, because I was a little bit in two minds about it myself. I still am, I suppose. But on the one hand, part of me goes, well, if there's life left in the car and the car is continuing to be used, surely that's a good thing. I always say the best car for the environment is a car that you basically run it into the ground. You get the most use out of it. And also because there's a need there, and these are cars that can be used. So on that side, it all seems quite logical. If I was Spock, I would say this is perfectly logical, and it makes perfect sense. But on the other side, you have these people who have had to let go of their vehicles, only to find that their vehicles are now being given to somebody else to use. I mean, yeah, okay, they got $2,000 for it, but still, for a lot of people, this is the thing that people don't understand. A car is not just an object. It's not just a fridge or a microwave oven or a cooker. It's a car, and a lot of people have a lot of sentimental values attached to a car. And to see that car then go off to a war zone, I don't know. According to a report by the LBC, although again, this report did come out in a number of places, ministers tell Sadiq Khan there are no legal barriers to stop him sending scrap cars to Ukraine in a ULEZ row after he blamed the government. So what happened was that he said, because of the legal requirement. So the way does the scrappage scheme works? Let me actually go back to that. When applying for a scrappage scheme, the process of actually scrapping your vehicle, you do that after your application is approved. So you cannot scrap your vehicle until your application is approved. But once your application is approved, you then scrap your vehicle, and then and that's got to be at an authorized treatment facility, an ATF, within a specified time frame, typically 1 month within the approval date. And then you take that certificate back to them, and then you get your money. The application process involves checking your vehicle's compliance with ULEZ standards, understanding the grant, payment options, meeting the eligibility criteria, which include being the registered owner of the vehicle, and also, and this has been a contentious thing for a lot of people, and also ensuring that the car does have valid insurance, valid road tax, and a valid MOT. So this is the idea. People are like, well, why am I scrapping a vehicle with all of those things? But I guess from this point of view, what they're saying is that, well, you got to prove to us that this is a car that you're using, and therefore you need another car. So it has to have all of those things. You will also need to provide certain documents, such as photo ID, proof of your London address, and of course the vehicle's V5C logbook. Now here's the interesting thing. You remember earlier I was talking about those, they were saying, oh, people doing double applications or whatever, implying perhaps that there was some fraudulent activity going on. I propositioned that actually it wasn't fraudulent, but it was inescapable because of the nature of the system. So for example, the application form times out after 30 minutes of inactivity. So they advise that you keep all your documents and everything there ready before you start the application process, because if you don't have everything to hand, it'll time out and then you have to start again. Now, could it be that people have actually done it, not realized, figured they didn't have the documents, weren't sure if it had gone through, and then had to do it again? And maybe it's completely innocent. why there's double, triple applications in there. Anyway, that's just a, I don't know for a fact, that's just a thought on my part. But going back to the LBC thing, the news about the Ukraine cars. So what happened was that he said, sure, we can send the cars to the Ukraine, but the legal requirement is that the car must be scrapped. Otherwise, I cannot approve. This is the mayor saying, I cannot approve the payment until we have proof that the car has been scrapped. Chicken and egg, like I was saying. You scrap the car, you can't send it to Ukraine. You send the car to Ukraine, you can't scrap it. See what I'm saying? So he was saying that that's why I can't do it. But then he was criticized for getting wrapped up in the red tape of the ULEZ scheme. So he called on Mark Harper, who's the Transport Secretary, to give Londoners the permission to donate their vehicles to the Ukraine and still get paid by the scrappage scheme. Harper responded that the Department of Transport does not consider there to be any legal barrier to allowing vehicles to be donated to Ukraine. He said, no, for as far as we're concerned, there's no issue with this. So he's responded to the mayor saying that they do not consider there to be any legal barrier to allowing vehicles to be donated to Ukraine. You have identified legal obstacles that relate to the processes and design of your scheme. You say you need robust reassurance that the cars donated to Ukraine will not find their way back to London's roads. So this is the other thing. He's scrapping the cars, so you can't send them abroad. So he's saying it's a legal requirement. Actually, it's just a requirement of the way that they've rolled out the scrapping scheme. So it's quite an easy tweak for them to change that. Secondly, he was like, well, how do I know the cars aren't going to end up back here again? Go back to earlier in the story to Vitaly Klitschko. I'll probably pronounce that completely wrong. He's Kiev's mayor in Ukraine. And he's asked cars that are destined to be scrapped to be sent there, especially 4x4s, off-roaders, and pickup trucks. These are to help save lives and to provide transportation and stuff like that for the military operation that's happening there. So regarding the whole issue about whether the cars are going to end up back here, so he said that the Ukrainian, so this is back to Mark Harper, he said the Ukrainian embassy has helpfully confirmed to my officials that Ukrainian law prevents the sale of property of Ukrainian armed forces, and that by decree right-hand drive vehicles can only be driven in Ukraine by members of the Ukrainian armed forces. So obviously they have left-hand drive vehicles there, and so therefore the vehicles are going to go to the army, so they're going to use it and then they can't sell them. I am sure, this is him continuing, I'm sure that you will also consider this reasonable certainty that vehicles donated to Ukraine through your scheme are highly unlikely to leave the hands of the Ukrainian army and return to the UK. He said the DVLA would also be willing to leave a note on the vehicle's record saying that it had been exported to Ukraine, and that would support your scheme's processes and prevent multiple scrappage payments from being made, and mitigates the risk of fraud. So that was the response. So basically that can be done, and it's really down to the mayor's office. So the government was like, well, it's not up to us, it's up to you. Like, we'll approve it, it's no problem, but it's nothing to do with us. It's not actually a legal requirement. There's so many with these things, isn't it? Because they keep saying, oh, it's a legal requirement. And you look into it and they're like, well, no, there isn't any legal requirement. Just because you say it's a legal requirement doesn't actually make it a legal requirement. So anyway, so that's what's happening with the scrappage scheme and the scrappage cars and Ukraine. I'd still love to hear your thoughts on that. But also what's happening in terms of, as you know, last Saturday, there was the first anniversary big protest from anti-ULEZ people, anti-ULEZ expansion, I should say, people, at Trafalgar Square. And you get a lot of people saying, oh, what are you protesting for? It's all done, nobody cares, it's all, we've moved on. And you would think that that maybe is the case. So people are like, oh, well, it's happened now, we've changed our car, we moved on, whatever, But it's not the case. Apparently, according to a report in London Loves Business, all right, more than 40% of London drivers feel negatively about Khan's ULEZ than before its expansion. Interesting. More than 40% of London motorists dislike Sadiq Khan's ultra-low emissions zone ULEZ now more than they did before its expansion in late August. Apparently, this data is from What Car. When asked whether their attitudes towards ULEZ had changed, 41% of London drivers surveyed said they had a stronger dislike of the scheme since its expansion. Yeah, well, that's not surprising. I mean, it was always going to be the case that people, had their head in the sand. Either they believed it wouldn't affect them, or they believed that, it wasn't going to happen. And then, of course, it happened, and then suddenly people wake up. It's like, oh my God, this happened. Oh, this hurts. Yeah. Let me continue. 41% of London drivers surveyed said they had a stronger dislike for the scheme since its expansion, whereas 16% have become more pro-ULEZ with the feelings of the remaining 43% unchanged. I think it's fair to say, with 43% remaining neutral, the 41 versus 16, the vast majority of people are more unhappy about ULEZ than they were before. Put it that way. 1 in 4 Londoners are so unhappy with the scheme that they approve. Get this. Hello, Blade Runners. 1 in 4 Londoners are so unhappy with the scheme that they approve of vandalism of ULEZ cameras. I ain't saying nothing. To avoid paying the daily fee more than a fifth, 22% of London motorists say they have either sold or are planning to sell or trade up their vehicle. So, I mean, a lot of people are just getting on with stuff, but they're not happy about it. This is a fact. I wonder how that will translate at the mayoral election in a few months' time. More widely, the survey revealed that 36% of respondents living outside London would be opposed to the introduction of a London-style low-emission scheme or clean air zone in their town or city, compared with only 25% in favour. So well over a third are like, well, you better not come here. Guys, this is what I've been saying. Now people are waking up. I've been saying since the beginning. What happens in London eventually spreads everywhere else. This is a test bed. Wake up, people. This is what I've been saying. Anyway, sorry, not for me to say. I'm just reporting here. So what car editor? Why am I laughing at that? The reason I'm laughing is because before ULEZ, my contemporaries in the automotive media network, I was constantly saying, like, why aren't people covering this? Why aren't people studying this? Why aren't people looking into this? As you guys know, people who follow me, I've been well over more than a year. I've been looking, actually, more than a year and a half since it was first mooted. I've been talking about ULEZ, looking into it, studying it, interviewing people, going to protests, covering protests, talking to people affected by it, and warning about what it's leading to, warning about where it's going, and nobody else would cover it. And now all of a sudden, people seem to have woken up, including the editor of What Car. Steve Huntingford said, attitudes towards ULEZ have certainly shifted negatively. Hey, no kidding. As highlighted by growing dissatisfaction with the scheme and the surprisingly high level of sympathy for the vandalization of ULEZ cameras. With many people apparently being priced off the road by the charge, more financial help is clearly needed to help people replace their non-compliant vehicles. Well, there you go. There's your ULEZ update for now. As you can see, the story is still not over. It's running and running and running. More facts, more figures, more data is going to come out. The one thing, of course, that we're all very keen to know is several months in now to the ULEZ expansion, has it actually made a difference? Look where I am. You may think, oh, this dude's walking around the countryside. No! I'm in northwest London. Wembley Stadium is just there. It's a stone's throw from here. It's the middle of northwest London. Has the ULEZ expansion made any impact here? I doubt it. Why am I laughing now? How freaky is this? Just as I'm coming to the end of the video, I look ahead. I'm telling you, complete and utter coincidence. And guess who's staring at me right here? Can you see that? Look, I'm not telling you how to vote. I would never tell you how to vote. This is here purely by coincidence. I looked up and I was like, what? But the one thing we all got to make sure is that the current mayor of London doesn't get in again for an unprecedented third term. Because if he does, then anybody who likes cars, who likes motoring, or who indeed likes the benefits of enjoying and running their own motor vehicle, might want to find a different country to live in. I'd love to hear your comments. I'm sure I will. I'll catch you all in the next video.
Brown car guy.
In London streets, where politics and power collide, The ULEZ Files by Brown Car Guy is a thrilling new novel depicting a high-stakes battle for the roads. Join Max Turner, a motoring journalist, as he uncovers a plot to control car ownership and personal liberties. With agent Eleanor Rodriguez and tech genius Flux Jackson, they race against time through London's iconic streets. It's a narrative that questions the balance between environmental policies and individual rights. For fans of cars, action, and political intrigue, The ULEZ Files promises high-speed chases, tactical ingenuity, and a fight for justice. Available now, exclusively on Amazon.com. The ULEZ Files by Brown Car Guy. Get your copy today.
Brown car guy.
Hope you enjoyed that video. If you did, please hit the like button and share this video as well if you can. And while you're at it, check out these guys who also sponsor my content. I am deeply grateful to them because it helps me to buy new equipment, put fuel in the cars, and yes, buy a cup of coffee. You can do the same. Just go here or right here on YouTube. Just hit these three little dots down here and click on thanks. Make sure you're signed in first. My content is free, but this is how you can help me keep it that way. I may even send you a gift. Oh, by the way, watch this next.